Konnichiwa. Today, we're going to talk about the next revolution in Japanese self-immersion, because it's already underway, and you can take part in it more easily and more cheaply than you may think. Until a decade or so ago, the only way to achieve Japanese immersion was to go to Japan, or else to a Japanese school, or somewhere else where Japanese was the language spoken. With the digital revolution and the various devices available to us all, cheaply and easily, we are now able to self-immerse in Japanese to a degree that was unthinkable until a relatively short time ago. And I've made plenty of videos on that general theme. The digital revolution has allowed us to surround ourselves with Japanese material, with active and passive intake of Japanese every day. But there were some problems it wasn't able to solve, and they are being solved right now. You couldn't actually put yourself into a full surround Japanese environment where you are interacting with other people. Now you can, through virtual reality. So you don't have to go to Japan, you don't even have to leave your room, but you can step into a world where you are surrounded with Japanese people and Japanese activity. So I'll talk towards the end a little bit about the equipment you need, some of which you may already have, and which will be within the reach of many of you fairly easily. So how do you get started with this? What you currently need is a reasonably powerful computer. It doesn't have to be a big desktop powerhouse or anything like that. A reasonably powerful laptop will do the job. Then you want to have a VR headset, and you can get one of those much cheaper and with much less fuss and difficult setup than you think. And I'll talk about that towards the end. If you don't have a headset, you can still get started. So how? Well, currently, the best way of doing this is going into a place called VRChat. You can do this on a computer screen if you don't have a headset. It's a rather inferior experience, and you should be aiming to get a headset as soon as you can, but you can get started without one. Now, I'm sure there are going to be other places that you can immerse in virtual reality before long, but currently we'll talk about VRChat because that's what's there right now. It's essentially a collection of hundreds of user-built worlds, many of which are English-speaking, only a few of which are Japanese-speaking, but Japanese-speaking ones do exist. And I'll put a note in the information section below, because this kind of information changes, so I want to put it somewhere where I can change it if and when necessary. But let's talk about the practicalities of interacting in virtual reality. You'll find VRChat to be perhaps unlike anything you've done before. You might have done Second Life at some point. And that's in many ways an attempt to replicate something like human life in a virtual world. VRChat is a bit different. People aren't, for the most part, aiming at realism. You'll find lots and lots of cute anime girls, usually with cat ears or fox ears and matching tails. And many of them will speak like young men from Tokyo or Osaka because that's what they are. And this isn't really a gender statement. It's just become the convention in VRChat that if you find an avatar cute, you can wear it if you want to. So how do you go about actually talking to people? Let's assume that you don't find it that easy to talk to people, strike up conversations. Does that mean that VRChat isn't going to work for you if you're not a confident, easy conversationalist even in English? Well, fortunately not. A lot of people in VRChat have some kind of social difficulty, and some people never speak at all. So if you don't speak for a while, nobody's really going to hold that against you. If you go into one of these Japanese worlds, what you're likely to find is a number of people mostly talking Japanese. There'll be groups of Japanese people talking Japanese among themselves. You'll see sometimes groups of foreigners or mixed Japanese and foreigners, some Korean, some Chinese, some French, some American, talking Japanese because Japanese is the language they have in common. Now, some people might worry, won't I hear bad Japanese if I'm talking to foreigners who speak Japanese? Yes, you will. But you are immersing in Japanese, aren't you? You are listening to your Japanese audio as much of the day as you can, aren't you? So you're going to hear a lot more good Japanese than you hear bad Japanese, and bad Japanese isn't going to hurt you. The advantage of people who aren't native speakers of Japanese is that they tend to speak slower and they tend to use a more limited vocabulary. So if you have trouble hearing native Japanese, you will probably have less trouble hearing the Japanese used by foreigners and by Japanese who are trying to tailor their speech to foreigners. However, if your level is high, you can join groups of Japanese people who would just be standing around the room somewhere chatting in Japanese. Now, should you just barge into a conversation? You may be asking. Well, the thing here is that in VRChat it's very, very, very easy to make private rooms. You don't have to create them. You can just clone an instance of a room and make it as private as you like. Invitation only, friends plus friends of friends, or whatever you want to do. What this means is that if people are standing around in a public room talking, they could easily be in a private room if they wanted to be. So at least in Japanese rooms, it does not tend to be considered in any way strange or creepy if you hang around on the fringes of a conversation, join in when you want to. And if you don't say anything, nobody's very surprised because there are quite a few people who don't. Now, is Japanese really the lingua franca here? Well, a lot of the time it is, but of course English is the world lingua franca, so you will come across some English. There will be people who want to supplement their Japanese with a bit of English. There'll be English speakers who just barge in assuming that everybody speaks English and expecting them to. Sometimes other people will speak a bit of English and sometimes groups get dragged in that direction. What do you do then? Well, you mute them. You don't want English ringing in your ears. The point of going into a Japanese virtual environment is to make it one of your places that's fenced off for Japanese only. So be ruthless, mute groups that are speaking English. If some of them are Japanese and just speaking English for the sake of some foreign speakers, you can always unmute them again a bit later. Will people try to address you in English? Sometimes they will. If they know you're a foreigner, which they probably will from your accent, they may think it's helpful. What do you do then? Well, full disclosure here, I don't actually use VRChat myself, so my information comes from my sister, Kinoko, who uses it rather a lot. And what she does is she simply does not let anybody know that she can speak English. What if people ask you? Well, you can either say you don't if you want to, or what Kinoko does usually is that she will say yes, she can speak a bit of English, and then make sure that she speaks so badly, so slowly, so understandably, that people decide that Japanese is really the better option. Another useful trick is looking rather blank when people speak to you in English and answering the wrong question. Now, keeping it a secret, as it were, that you can speak English or that you can speak it very well, not that Kinoko's English is all that good actually, has another important psychological benefit for you, because you may be tempted to join this one English conversation that seems a bit useful. You may be tempted to fall back on English just now and again, just this once. But if you don't want people to know that you know any English, then you're barring yourself from doing that, and that's exactly what you want. This needs to be a fenced-off area, which is Japanese only as far as you're concerned. Now again, supposing you are somewhat socially inhibited, how do you manage to approach people? Well, you can join conversations, as I said before. In one-on-one situations, it's a very interesting area because, as I've said, a lot of people don't talk, and very often talking is not the first thing people do. Some people do. Some people are full of confidence and just chatter away all the time at anybody. But an awful lot of people take quite a while to warm up to talking. So when you see a new person, very often the first move is to wave at them. Now you have hands. In virtual reality you can move around. It's very similar in some ways to what people call real life. So your first gesture might be to wave at someone, and if they ignore you and walk on, that's okay. If they wave back, you've started some kind of a relationship perhaps. The next move may be to jump up and down. And if they jump up and down in response, then you've made a little bit more contact. You might send emoticons like hearts or thumbs up symbols, which you can do. And all of this is just inching towards some kind of a relationship which may end up in a speaking relationship. It really is like that in many cases. And very much unlike the so-called real world, the next step can be, in some cases, petting. If you've got a cute little avatar, the person you're making contact with may come up and stroke your ears or something like that. Again, this can be done in virtual reality because it's a full surround 3D environment. So very much unlike what they call real life, where you would have to have a pretty substantial speaking relationship before you start touching anyone. In virtual reality, it often goes the other way around. You might start by waving, jumping, and sending little emoticons. You might move on to stroking somebody's ears and patting their head. And eventually, when you both feel enough confidence from all of that, you might actually start to talk. Now, if you've no patience with all of that, there are conversations that you can jump into. But if you're very shy, this is a very good way of warming up and getting ready to start. So it makes it a much easier entry than you get anywhere in what they call real life. Another question that may well worry you is my Japanese good enough for this? Well, the answer to that is that if you can hold a basic conversation in Japanese, a lot of the early conversations are just going to be about things like, where do you live and what kind of food do you like and things like that. Then you're all right for starting. If you're hesitant about that, if you're finding that difficult, what I would recommend is getting a bit of conversation practice first. And the best way of doing that is to find a conversation partner or a conversation tutor. And you can do this online. A lot of them still work through Skype or something like that. An exchange partner, you can get practice talking Japanese to someone in exchange for having periods of talking English. If you pay a tutor, now they may not be a professional tutor and they may not do very much tutoring. But the advantage of that is that you're not wasting half the time speaking English. Actually having someone who is there to help you get started speaking Japanese is probably a better way than plunging right into VRChat if you really only got a very limited grasp of the language. So try doing at least some of the structure course, try doing some input immersion, and try some conversation practice if you think you need it. Now, some people may be able to dive right into VRChat. It's very much up to you how you feel and what your strengths and weaknesses are. The important thing is that this really is the next step. It's just the beginning. It's like the Intellivision stage of games or the Ford 8 stage of the motor car. Everything's just beginning. But this is a terribly important revolution. It's going to make as much difference. In fact, it's going to make more difference than the digital revolution did to the possibility of self-immersion. Now, I said I'd talk a little bit about the hardware, and what I'd recommend if you're not wanting to get into VR for gaming and things like that is that if you have a powerful enough computer, and as I said, it doesn't have to be an absolute powerhouse, but you need to check its potential, and you can do this online. What I would tend to recommend is Windows MR, which stands for Mixed Reality, but is in fact virtual reality. And you can get a headset for $200 upwards and downwards. What I would recommend is a Samsung Odyssey Plus, which is a very high quality headset at a very reasonable price. It came out at $500, I think. Now you can get one for $250 or $229 when it's on offer. And you can get cheaper ones too. If you can pick up a Dell visor or something like that, you can get it for cheaper than that. The other important thing about Windows Mixed Reality is that you don't need to have these base stations and lighthouses that you may have heard about scattered across your room. It really is plug and play. A whole new world of virtual immersion is open and waiting for you. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments below, and I will answer as usual. I'd like to thank my gold Kokeshi patrons who make these videos possible, and all my patrons and supporters on Patreon and everywhere who are helping us to pioneer this new world of structure and immersion-based Japanese. And I'd like to thank you for attending this lesson. これからもよろしくお願いします。Class dismissed.